US edition.
In sunny Los Angeles, we meet America's top Koreans. James Yu, founder of Koream, a window into Korean life in the U.S. C.S. Lee's inside scoop on Dexter, revealed for the first time on Arirang.
Here in Washington, D.C.
Then we go to Washington to speak of freedom. A modern hero's take on human rights today. Dana Tysoon Burgess, an Asian American dancer, speaks to the world with his body.
In the city of cities, New York, New York.
Korean food wins over New York's trendiest diners. Be captivated by Hooni Kim's philosophy in the kitchen. Get ready for the Interview's must-see United States edition.
Welcome to The Interview. I am Susan Lee MacDonald in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States of America. As the center of American domestic and foreign policy, it is a city that symbolizes the ideals of democracy and freedom. Today, I'm standing in front of the historic Georgetown University front gates. Today's very special guest is an author, consultant, human rights activist, and someone that I know you're going to want to meet. He has spent over 4 years of his life on the North Korean border in China to help North Korean refugees find a better life. I know that you're going to want to meet this person. He's got some amazing stories to tell. Our first guest is Mike Kim. Let's go see him. Mike Kim, an activist for North Korean human rights. After seeing the plight of North Korean refugees firsthand on a trip to China, Mike Kim liquidated all of his assets and decided to devote himself to the dangerous task of helping North Koreans find freedom. Mike Kim has risked his life to protect North Koreans' right to the pursuit of happiness. His book, Escaping North Korea, placed his story in the spotlight. And his bravery was praised by the Wall Street Journal as that of a modern-day hero. After an interview on Jon Stewart's The Daily Show, Mike Kim's story received continued media attention and is now in the process of being adapted for a movie. Mike Kim's work continues after his return to the United States. He continues to be the voice of North Korean refugees on speaking tours and White House Korean American events. How did an ordinary sports jock grow up to become a human rights activist? Meet Mike Kim, a champion of North Korean human rights, on this week's The Interview. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Susan.
Hey, so great to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Oh, I'm so excited that you've decided to say yes to the interview.
Well, I can't wait for our time together. I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. You know, one of the great things about DC and Georgetown is the fact that they have so many amazing alumni, and here you are, one of their most proudest creations in some respects.
Georgetown has been great to me. I did my graduate, my MBA degree here. They've been so supportive, hosted book signings for me on campus, you know, put me in their newspaper and on their website, and some great professors here that have really mentored me. So I can't thank the school enough.
Oh, wonderful. Well, you know, there's so much that our audience wants to know all about you, and just out of personal curiosity, I feel like I have to ask you this. What inspires you about doing the work that you do?
I think just spending time with people and living amongst them and seeing how in need people are. And, you know, 2 trips changed my life, one to Africa and then later on to China. And just knowing that people, they're out there, there are people in need and that we can help. I think that's what keeps me going.
Wow. Well, I know that I am so excited to ask you tons of questions about you. So shall we head to where our location
sure,
is?
definitely.
Okay, let's go.
The opening paragraph to my book is, in November 2004, I was in northern Laos, standing in the back of a truck with 6 angry soldiers pointing their AK-47s at me. I was leading 2 North Korean refugee women through the 6,000-mile modern-day underground railroad that begins in North Korea and runs through China and Southeast Asia. We hope to gain asylum for them in South Korea. We had just illegally crossed the border from southern China into Laos and had been captured by Border Patrol soldiers. As I stood there with my hands in the air, I thought to myself,
Mike, thank you so much for coming on to our show, The Interview.
Hi, Susan. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited, and I know that so many of our viewers are just hungering for some information from you because of your incredible life story. You're having gone to the border of North Korea and living there for several years, and my goodness, with the book that you've written, it's just really just tugged at the hearts of so many people out there.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people scratch their heads and try to figure out. I mean, they ask me, how did you sell everything that you had, and what made you do that? And just following my progression of different decisions throughout my life. But I think there is a thread there, so I'm happy to explore that with you.
Wonderful. I'm curious, with your family, you know, being kind of pioneers and coming to the States before the rest of your family, that must have been a really hard decision for them to think about leaving their family in Korea.
Yeah, I think so. You know, as far, I should ask my parents a lot more questions as far as going into the psyche of how they made that decision. I guess, in a way, it's what I did with selling or giving up everything I had in Chicago and wanting to go after a dream at the China-North Korea border. And they really did that. They gave up the comfort of their life in Seoul, Korea, and it's amazing to me that they did that with just a few $100s.
Wow.
Going to a country, you know, where you don't speak the language, you don't really know anybody, and sometimes I joke around about that they came over with a few $100s and $400 to their name, and I sold everything and reverse immigrated back to Asia with really just a few $100s as well.
That's amazing. You know, before going into your story of being on the North Korean border, tell me a little bit about your childhood. I understand that you spoke English in the house and that you went to a very prestigious school from K through 4, right? The University of Chicago Lab School, is that right?
That's right. The University of Chicago Lab School, I started kindergarten there, went through the 4th grade, and when I think back on those memories, you know, you had to qualify to get in, and I was just blown away with my parents' commitment to our education. We were just, you know, how many years would they have been? You know, maybe 6, 7, 8 years in the U.S. at that point. And after just having arrived to spend that much, tuition was really expensive.
Wasn't it like 10 grand per person?
Yeah, I don't want to misquote, but something like that, 5 to 10 grand per child. They, and just a commitment to pay for 3 children, that I couldn't imagine that expense. And then the commitment to drive us there, which was through brutal Chicago traffic from the suburbs. It was an hour and a half commute to 2 hours each way. So we're talking 3 to 4 hours commute daily before and after work. And eventually when my aunts and uncles came over, it was split duty. I mean, everyone shared the duty of getting us there and back. So it's a big commitment, and I'm really impressed that my parents did that.
So it's the village of your family that raised your children, all 3 of you, yes?
Yeah, what do they say? It takes a village to raise a child.
Yes.
And definitely for us, my parents could not have done it on their own, and my aunts and uncles all helped out. And recently they told me stories of bringing us as kids as college students to their classrooms.
Oh my goodness.
To their lecture halls.
Wow.
And I just tried to imagine myself doing that in college. And I can't imagine taking a baby or a young child with me to the lecture hall. And I remember, you know, being stuck in traffic, and my aunt was driving me, and it was one time, I think, a 3-hour commute, and I was just throwing a tantrum. I was being a kid and saying, you know, I want to be home right now. And she was turning around saying, what do you want me to do? We're stuck in traffic. And they went through a lot, definitely, to get us that education.
Well, it sounds like there's so much love in your family to sacrifice so much for you guys.
It is. It's a very generous and very loving family, and I'm sure shaped who I am and all of us, the young cousins, as well, who we are today.
Are you, would you say that you are probably very resourceful?
I would say so. I
Yeah.
think it's pretty accurate. I don't like to take no for an answer. I don't like to give up. And if there's a way, I'd like to think that I can find the way to accomplish something.
In high school, could you give us an example of a time where you just did not give up with something that you believed in?
Sure. In high school, I would say it would probably be, sports related. I mean, our high school was not known for sports, and we didn't have great teams. We were about a 2,000 student population in the school, so it was a decent sized public school in the Chicago suburbs area, Skokie, Illinois, where I grew up. And I went in there, and the teams had never done phenomenally well, but the volleyball team, I started just giving my time and effort to volleyball. I found the coach told me that freshman year I made the varsity team, and she told me that
That's really impressive. Freshman year varsity team?
It was quite an honor. There was a bit of buzz around that, but yeah, as a freshman, I made it on the varsity team, and the coach told me, "Hey, Mike, if you stick with this, you've got a future in this sport." So by my senior year, we placed third in state.
Impressive.
Yeah, it was a big year, and a lot of us, the different players, got awards, and I think that's just an example of finding a way. We didn't give up, and we did well, and we were recognized for our efforts.
That's fantastic. Now, take me to your college years. What did you study, and why did you decide to go to school in that area?
Sure. I stayed in state. It was a very convenient and easy decision. Urbana, I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I studied history. I wanted to double major in business and history, but the business school would not let you double major, so I chose history, and that's in line with how I've made decisions throughout my life, and thankfully my parents have encouraged me as well, is to really follow your passion. I think a lot of parents would have given a hard time about choosing history. It's not practical. What are you going to do for work? Where are you going to make money? But my parents always encouraged me to follow my passion, and I think that's played out. My strengths, I would think one I might say is vision. It's just the ability to see a picture of the future and to work towards that, and to try and inspire people to want to work with me towards that. So I'd like to think I'm a visionary, and love articulating the future, painting a picture of the future to people, and recruiting people to work with me to achieve that goal.
I'm curious, did you set a goal in mind when you first decided to go to China on a trip there?
Yeah, when I first went there, no, because it was such a radical decision. It was so beyond anything I'd ever done. After I sold and liquidated everything I had and paid off any remaining debt, I had $1,000 left, and it wasn't, my thinking wasn't necessarily, I'm going to start this organization, write a book, work on a movie. It was so baby steps. It was just, let's meet some people, let's survive, let's survive for a year, have enough finances to do that. Let's learn the language, learn Korean. And, so I guess those were some small goals. Learn the culture. Let's meet people in China that eventually I could recruit to be my staff. Let's meet North Koreans that I could potentially help. And I guess those were the goals, but they were such baby steps. No larger goals beyond that.
So before you actually liquidated everything and you went to live in China, you had taken a short, 2-week vacation there?
Right.
And is that the genesis for you deciding to go back to China and live there?
Sure. It was, I had traveled, I had a Peace Corps application in my hand out of college.
Oh, yeah.
So it's something I always wanted to act upon. I never had the chance to. So I was 24 at the time. I had a financial planning business, and it was growing well. Growing clientele was increasing. All of it was going well. And then I had just been awarded for the most revenue generation in the office that month. It was July 2001. I hired my own personal assistant and asked her to clear my calendar for 2 weeks so I could travel to the China-North Korea border, or to travel in China. And it was in that North Korea border that I met a North Korean refugee for the first time.
Would you mind telling me the story of the person that you first met?
I met 2 girls I'll mention. One is a young North Korean refugee girl, and somebody asked me, they said, guess how old she is? And I said, I would guess she's 7 years old. And I had been playing with her. We had been playing hide and seek and different games. And they said she's 13 years old. And I was blown away.
Wow.
And they said she had been so malnourished, her growth so stunted from the famine, that she was 6 years behind. She looked about 6 years younger than she actually was.
Oh my goodness.
And it was then I learned about the famine. I also learned about another issue, which was the selling of North Korean women in China to fill this void of a shortage of women. It's becoming a real serious problem in the country. So I met a 16-year-old girl. It was one of the next people I met was a 16-year-old girl who was a victim of sex trafficking. She was abducted in China as she was searching for food and raped by the traffickers and then sold to the highest paying man for $1,000 US. And the man was 57 years old, couldn't find a wife, and decided to pay for a bride. And she was, of course, raped and kept in bondage, living as a sex slave. And I met more teenage girls like her, and I had never...
How did you meet these people?
Yeah, they were, these girls I met in shelters, different shelters, as well as in China they have these, they call them house churches. So they were churches throughout the country that met in people's homes.
They're like underground, though.
Right, they are underground because of some the religious persecution in China. There isn't the freedom for them to gather and worship, so they meet underground, which is a good place for North Koreans to hide.
Yes.
And so these were the areas that I met a lot of them. And as I met these teenagers, their stories just blew me away, and I said, I can't believe this is going on. And I returned to the U.S. really rocked by that whole experience.
You must have been incredibly shaken by that.
I was, and I distinctly remember sitting across from clients, and this was a job that I loved. I was good at it. I absolutely loved it. And in this job that I had absolutely loved, as I was talking to them about investments and retirement planning, the North Koreans were on my mind, and I was thinking, I've got to do something to help them.
It must have been a huge risk to just leave everything, sell everything, and go there. Not only for the actual danger of being caught doing something illegal. North Koreans are known for their horrible torture tactics, and we are now learning a lot more about those political prisoner camps that are just horrible. But the fact that you could have been kidnapped yourself, the fact that your family would, and being so close to your family, you would never have a chance to see your family again had that happened. What was like to make that decision to go? Yeah,
the biggest risk was the possibility of being abducted by the North Koreans, the agents or assassins, which we know now with the 2 journalists, Yuna and Laura Ling, their experience is a reality. And the second big threat was being imprisoned by the Chinese because they consider it illegal to assist North Koreans, and they've imprisoned foreigners, U.S. citizens for years. So that was the other big risk. So it was definitely a front of mind, and I realized. And then there was a risk of failure. A lot of people told me that. Before I went over, there were a lot of people. A majority of the people told me I would fail, and they said, asked me, what am I doing? They said, you don't speak the language, you don't know the North Korean situation, you're young in a culture where being old is important, and they said, you're going to fail, and don't go, was the overwhelming advice that I've gotten from people. And for me it was, when you're when you're passionate about something, and for me, I talk about the what if moment.
The what if moment?
The what if moment when I had returned from China, North Korea from that short 2-week trip. I was asking myself, Mike, what if? What if you gave up all of this to spend a few years helping the North Koreans? What would happen? And that, and I often say when that what if reaches a certain threshold, or when that voice becomes too loud, I have to do something to act. And I kept on thinking, what if? What would happen? What would come out of it? And it wasn't because I thought I was so great, but it's because the passion was so great that I decided, you know what, this is something I've got to do, because I don't want to live 20, 30 years from now thinking, I wonder what would have happened.
You didn't want any regrets.
Yeah, exactly. When I look at different people, I look at the people I admire among my peers, sometimes I wish I was a little bit more bold and social. For example, I think of some of my friends that are really good at generating interest through Facebook and Twitter, and for myself, I'm not doing that as much. And I just wish I was a little bit more like that, a little bit more bold and aggressive when I see my friends doing some of those things.
Mike, what did you do your first year in China?
The first year was just a lot of survival, learning how to live in China, how to get around. I had to learn Mandarin enough to travel and to take care of all my needs over there. I spent a lot of time backpacking, just learning the country. So I went all over from the northwest corner to the southern tip, backpacking through the mountains. And
must have been amazing to backpack all over the place. It was an amazing
experience, spending time with the minority groups, in rural areas and villages, and remember even experiences of just sharing room with livestock. Wow! And remember
livestock.
Sleeping,
that's amazing.
Yeah, I remember sleeping with chickens and goats in the room,
and you could actually sleep through all that noise.
Yeah, I think I was so exhausted. I managed to. And I just think back on experiences like that and can't believe I was doing all that back then. At the same time, learning Korean, networking, meeting anybody that would know anything about North Koreans, diplomats, journalists, and as well as people within the churches, because that was an immediate way to tap into a powerful network, very organized group of people that were concerned about North Koreans, maybe knew something about North Korea. Your
work with the North Korean refugees is intense by any standard. The hours that you had to keep, the intense secrecy that you had to protect who they were. And I'm curious, what was it like for your first time helping a North Korean refugee go on that Underground Railroad?
Oh wow, the first time I did that 6,000-mile journey from the China-North Korea border through China, through Laos, over to the Mekong River, taking that down to the Golden Triangle, and then into Bangkok. I just remember a lot of hardship, a lot of times when we wanted to give up, a lot of times when we thought we wouldn't make it, being caught along the way, and making it into Bangkok. And I remember we did a big celebratory meal, and seeing the women crying, and because they were just so happy, because the first point in their lives they had true freedom, and to see them cry, and one of them said, Teacher Kim, thank you, I owe you my life. And it's a weird feeling to have someone thank you for their life, saying, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be alive today. Maybe some people would like that kind of gratitude. It's very awkward, makes you very uncomfortable, but at the same time rewarding to know that you literally are saving lives. You're helping people to, to be transformed and to have a new dream.
Give me an example of one of the hardships that you suffered on that journey.
On that journey, the one that would come to mind, other than the whole experience of mapping out the route, the part of the route that I was responsible for, which took weeks and a lot of trial and error and being caught and a lot of stress, other than that, it was when we were doing the actual journey, and we had just crossed from China into Laos, and one of the women couldn't handle the hike, and she collapsed. And I call her, I refer to her as Mrs. Lee in the book, and she tried multiple times, and she had to stop, and she was also sick when she was doing the journey, and said, Teacher Kim, I can't make it anymore. Thank you so much for trying to do this for me. I am so appreciative. I'll just stay and I'll die here, and please continue on. And well, you're not prepared for moments like that, right?
What did you do?
I remember putting my hand on her shoulder, not really knowing what to do, but with all the intensity I could muster up, I just said, we're not going to leave you here, and you're not going to die here. With all the authority I could muster up, and we are going to get you to Bangkok. And it seems like a miracle. We took a lot of breaks, but eventually we made it to Bangkok. She's still she's in Seoul now, living now with her husband. To this day, when I call her, she'll scream when she hears my voice, and she screams in joy, and then she says, Teacher Kim, and then she starts crying, and then I have to wait for a minute or two as she's crying, and I often joke, I don't know how I feel about this woman crying every time I call her, but then she'll say, thank you for my life here in Korea, and those moments make it all worth it. I've heard of people, some of our refugees that were in our shelters being sent to prisons with people. What had happened is they were captured and sent back to North Korea, repatriated, and amongst that group, they've seen people forcefully aborted by kicking the guards kicking their stomachs until they were forcefully aborted. They've seen people disappear because they were wearing a cross necklace, and they were assumed to be Christian, and for that they disappeared and were never seen again. I've heard stories of cannibalism, people eating other people to survive, and pretty gruesome stuff. But those stories were more rare, but I did definitely come across those stories during my time there at the border.
What happened when you were caught? What were the thoughts that went through your mind?
Yeah, I didn't know that things would work out okay. When we were caught, immediately the two women started bawling, and they knew, they saw the soldiers coming with guns, and I immediately stepped to the front. We were on a truck. I stepped to the front of the truck. I had my hands in the air, and there were something like 6 to 8 Border Patrol soldiers, Lao guys coming over, and I slowly reached into my back pocket because I had a U.S. passport, and I was thinking that might help us negotiate. So I slowly reached in my back pocket, and then I showed them the passport, and then they took us to the police station where the captain was, and they were strip searched. We all were strip searched, and we were detained under house arrest for 2 days. And at one point,
were you given food and something to
we
drink?
were given food. Yeah, we were fine. And then they said. They said at one point, the captain said on day 2, said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to return them to North Korea. And then they just started bawling, and I pleaded with them for their lives, and eventually he let us go. He said if we paid a fine, that he would let us go.
Was that fine a bribe?
Exactly, yeah. That it was, and that's one of the tough things about this work. You talk about black and white. That was one of the things really difficult for me, because we could not have done the work without paying people. And it's just one of the realities of this type of work. You have some really black and white people that say, especially since I was in Christian church circles, that say, don't ever tell a lie. You couldn't do that work without, because you have to state what you're doing when you're going to China, on the forms, and people ask you, what are you doing?
Oh, Hi, I'm here to take out North Korean refugees.
Right, exactly. So I'll often joke that I never became a liar until I moved to China to help North Koreans, because I was regularly lying to people. Sometimes people would ask me, say, are you helping North Koreans? And I just look them dead in the eyes and say, no. And you can't, because you're endangering people.
Absolutely.
So for me, it was always the greater good of saving lives is more important than that principle of not trying to lie or not paying a bribe.
When you decided to leave the border of North Korea and China, what was the main reason for that?
Yeah, I stayed for 4 years. There were 2. You know, Peace Corps workers do it for 2 years and they're exhausted at the end. You know, I had done it for 4 and I was exhausted. I mean, it was very tiring work.
Emotionally just must
emotionally
have been
draining.
difficult.
We're not designed to deal with life and death situations every day.
Yeah.
And you get desensitized. You know, we're just not meant to handle that. You know, when I left my apartment, I would leave sometimes looking for somebody to be on the other side, a North Korean agent. I mean, when I walked down the streets at night, I would check behind me regularly. So we're not meant to live like that. So it was exhausting. Right. The other is that I pioneered the work for crossing borders in the field. So I was taking the risks of being caught multiple times and you know, all of that. So we really felt that you know, China and North Korea might have known quite a bit about me by then. So we thought it'd be safer for the whole work as well if I went and then a couple came in and replaced me.
Each year, North Koreans choose to risk their lives and attempt escape to find a way out of the famine and poverty that surrounds them. They hope for a better, freer life. Even when served with the most humblest of meals, the children are filled up with hope and happiness. Although these children are at risk of losing their innocent smiles too soon, they rely on each other to keep their hopes for the future alive in the face of oppression and persecution. Mike Kim has been a rock for these children, caring for them like a parent. We hope that one day his efforts will bring nothing but big, clear smiles to these children's faces. When did crossing borders begin?
Yeah, there's a couple ways to answer. One is, you know, when I moved to China on January 1st, 2003, that was the beginning of crossing borders. I arrived, but before then, we even had efforts. I had my founding team of 2 other people, it was 3 of us, that started a website. We wanted to raise awareness before I left, and you know, it's kind of hard to say exactly when that was. You could say it was 2003. You could say after that when we were officially incorporated as a 501c3, or before that when we started the website, but somewhere around there.
And how is Crossing Borders funded, and how did you fund yourself while you were out there?
Yeah, initially funded through whatever I had left. When I did liquidate everything I had, I liquidated my 401k and paid off any remaining college debt and bought a one-way ticket to China. Then I had $1,000 left. So that was the start of crossing borders. And during that time, it was really tough. I could have called my parents. We talked about family. I could have called my parents at any moment, or my relatives, my generous relatives, and asked for money. But I felt like this would be cheating. I thought this was my decision. And that would be cheating to put the weight on my family to support this decision I had made. So I didn't do that. So there were times at which I would skip meals. I'd think to myself, do I want to spend a few dollars to buy food, or do I want to save this money because it was so scarce? And there were times where I made conscious decisions to skip lunch or skip dinner or just eat peanut butter jelly sandwiches for weeks as I was prepping in the U.S. And it's kind of crazy to think back on that time. So that was how it started. Now we have our funding comes a third from individual donors, a third from organizations and businesses, and a third from churches.
I really admire so much of the backbone that it must have taken for you to not only just go to China, but to stay in China for 4 years and to help so many people. And I think that many people might wonder, did he really just go for altruistic reasons?
Sure.
Is there some other reason? And I'm guessing, was there a possibility of maybe going there because of a love of your life who went there, or some other reason? Was it truly just to go and help these people?
Yeah, it's funny. I have these conversations every once in a while where someone just probes. They're like, come on, no one does that just to help people. And there's got to be some other reason you went. But for me, it was, if there was any selfish desire, it was just wanting to help people. And, I think some people do a Peace Corps experience, for example, because they really want to devote a period of their life to living with people in poverty or suffering and help them. So, no, unfortunately, there was no love interest during those 4 years. It was a pretty barren 4 years, unfortunately, and a big sacrifice out of my dating life while all my friends were getting married and, buying houses and cars and saving up.
Did you make up for lost time when you came back stateside?
I'm getting there, yeah. I'm slowly getting there, thankfully. But it was a big gap, right? All my friends, when I came back, they had multiple homes or, had saved up and were married or had kids. And so it was a big sacrifice in that sense as well. But really, yeah, no other motive other than just a real burning desire to help people that I had seen and met and couldn't shut the door on after that. And I think that makes a big difference. When you meet people and see them, and you've traveled abroad, and I'm sure you've seen certain situations, of poverty or suffering, and when you meet a person, it's different.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Yul Kwan. I'm the winner of Survivor Cook Islands and the host of PBS's America Revealed. I think even from the first time I met Mike, I was just really struck by how passionate he was about the work that he did and about his commitment to helping other people. I think Mike's a really interesting guy and a very capable person because on one hand he's both an idealist, like he really tries to make the world a better place and to help people, but he's also very pragmatic, like he knows how to get things done. And so in terms of him, Mike as a human rights activist, I really think he kind of embodies the best of both worlds. Someone who really aspires for something better than what we have today, but someone who's also capable of achieving that goal.
Getting back to you coming back stateside, why did you choose to go to Georgetown MacDonald School of Business?
Georgetown has been phenomenal to me. It was just really the right home. I wanted to do business school because I thought it'd be a good time to transition and really think through what I wanted to do with my life. Georgetown because it was in DC. I was going to DC regularly during my work on the field to meet with people in Congress here, NGO activists, some of my mentors at the State Department. Ambassador Mark Palmer, who wrote the foreword to my book, is one of the most key people that has changed my life. Yes. He's one of the guys that has changed my life and set the example for me the most. So, and he's here, he lives right here in Georgetown, and he's on the board for Georgetown University. But the MacDonald School of Business made sense because if you look at the website, it's about the intersection of business and politics. And that was it for me. I wanted to see how business intersects with my passion, as well as with policy, specifically North Korea, East Asia. So it turned out to be a really amazing time. I know you interviewed Mike Green. Mike Green was one of my professors here. I went to the MBA program. I said, can I, as two of my classes, instead, can I do a study with Professor Mike Green on North Korea? Yes. They said, okay. So they've been phenomenally supportive.
So Mike Kim introduced himself to me at Georgetown University, and he introduced himself because he had just written this book on his experiences in China helping refugees escape from North Korea. And I couldn't believe it, that the student in the business school had such a fascinating background. And the people you usually meet in this NGO world, particularly on human rights, are driven by passion. And sometimes the passion gets the better of them. And they often don't have the discipline and the sort of pragmatic business approach of Mike Kim. And if they're on the right sometimes they get quite involved attacking and criticizing the regime publicly. And if they're in the left, sometimes they get involved explaining or defending the regime and trying to find ways to engage the regime. Mike didn't care about any of that. He just wanted, in a very practical way, sort of like a businessman thinking of the bottom line, to help as many North Koreans as he could. And he figured out an ingenious way to do it. So he's really unique. Of all the NGO people I've met working on North Korea human rights or humanitarian issues, he's the most unique because he's the most normal guy.
After going to the School of Business here at Georgetown, you decided to take some time off, right, to write a book about your experiences.
I did. Actually, I wrote the book before.
Ah.
And the year before I started business school, I had known I gotten in, and so I took a year off to write. And then I lived actually, I said I could live anywhere I want to write this book. Mm-hmm. And you know, I felt like I had earned a good year off. Mm-hmm. So I spent half of the year writing in Florida. A friend of mine owns a golf course.
Nice.
There, so I spent time with him and his wife and just
big
played
contrast
free golf.
from the borders of North Korea and on a golf course.
I felt like I earned it, so we'd play a lot of golf and lived with him and his wife. And then the second half, I lived in Sydney, Australia, which is one of my favorite cities in the world.
Well, you know, I'd like to read a couple of reviews of your book from some of the people that you really admire and have been kind of your mentors.
Sure.
So I'm going to go get a book
Sure.
To read. Thank you. Now, Escaping North Korea. Jon Stewart of The Daily Show, he says, one of the most incredible stories of personal bravery that I've ever heard of. One man equipped only with his passion and a group of people equally committed, helping North Koreans escape through a modern-day underground railroad.
That's actually a direct quote from the interview that I had done with him. I think I was on the day after Cameron Diaz, which is really weird. I was in the green room the day after her, and very, very kind. I mean, he was just blown away by the story. And it was actually after that interview aired that Hollywood became interested.
Yes.
And we started getting contacted from people in Hollywood saying, hey, is anyone working on turning this into a movie? But what a great experience. He's phenomenal.
My name is Chris Lee, and I'm Mike Kim's manager and also producer on the book-to-film adaptation of his book, Escaping North Korea. I first saw Mike on TV on a major news program called The Jon Stewart Daily Show, and he was talking about his story and his book, Escaping North Korea. And Jon Stewart said it himself, that this is one of the most incredible stories of personal bravery that he's ever heard. And I agree with him. I was completely blown away when I heard this story because he was talking about the North Korean issue not only from the point of view of the usual hot-button political issues like nuclear weapons or the crazy dictatorship that most of the American press focuses on, but he was shedding light on everyday North Korean life and also the humanitarian crisis that is ongoing today. So I literally prayed to God that night, let me meet somebody like him, because I was also very passionate about the issue.
Mike, what are some of your future plans with Crossing Borders, as well as future work as a humanitarian?
Yeah. Crossing Borders, I'm now a donor for the organization. All the people running it are my best of friends. So I talk to them weekly. We're, you know, just yesterday I was on the phone with them, just talking through an event that's coming up. So, you know, I'm working with them, but I'm not officially involved anymore. Those are the extent of my activities. My big work for North Korea is, as it relates to the book, doing public speaking tours, raising awareness that way, and working on this movie project. Separate from that, you know, I'm doing consulting work, really applying my business background, where I am consulting for the U.S. government on analyzing human trafficking data and human trafficking networks, and working with a large consulting firm to do that.
Do you miss being on the border of North Korea and having that intensity of lifestyle for so long?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I was reading about, I think his name is Bill Bryson, who wrote about his experiences hiking the Appalachian Trail, and in the end, in the epilogue, he said something that I quote in the book, in the epilogue of my book. He said something along the lines of, I loved it and hated it at the same time when I thought back on it. And I think that sums it up pretty well, because it wasn't all easy. It was extremely tough at times, and it was, you know, there were some down times, there was some lonely times, but then there were the victories that we experienced. So, you know, I loved and hated it at the same time. And so, yeah, definitely there's times now when I think back and said, I want nothing more than to be back on the China-North Korea border, living with the North Koreans, helping them. You know, life doesn't get much more real than that. Feeding somebody that's hungry, helping someone escape that is not free. And, you know, I truly do miss those times.
So Mike, congratulations on the focus that you're helping to bring to human rights in North Korea. The only advice I have for you is keep it up. I think it's important now that a new generation of Koreans and a new generation of Americans and Japanese and Chinese and people around the world pay attention to this issue, advocate for change, raise consciousness in a consistent way, because so often attention to North Korean human rights issues has been episodic. And if you can play a role in keeping that consistent focus, that would be a great thing beyond what you've already contributed.
So Mike, I'm always honored to be working with you on this project because it is so important, and so much more important than even the both of us and just making a movie, because this movie has so much potential to impact change about this issue. It's astonishing that the way of getting outside information into Korea used to be dominated by just doing airdrops into North Korea and spreading propaganda. But if we can make a movie that can show not only outsiders, but also those living inside North Korea, what is out there, you know, and download this movie into USB drives and get it to the eyes and ears of the North Korean people, I strongly believe that we can impact real change on a cultural level.
Mike, it's been such an amazing time today talking with you about your experiences, about your life. You're an incredible person with an amazing heart, and I know that not only have I been affected by just hearing your story, I know that so many people around the world are going to hear about your story from our show. And would you be able to give me and some of the audience members advice about what we can do individually to help?
On this subject, you know, right now it's such an unknown issue that awareness really is the first step. So any way to raise awareness, and it starts with one, being educated ourselves, and then telling somebody, telling a friend, a family member, 1, 2, 10, 20. And that's something we can very realistically do within our own communities. Blog about it, put up a post about it. And then from there, you know, for people that want to take that extra step, is the bigger steps of, you know, a website or some kind of crazy idea, making a YouTube video, or from there actually connecting with an NGO, getting involved. And that's usually what I suggest, is for people that want to take that step, connect with an NGO, someone like a Link or Crossing Borders, and you know, whether you want to financially give, volunteer your time, be part of an activity, or actually visit the China-North Korea border, or visit Seoul, Korea, and spend some time with the North Korean refugees, that would be my recommendation.
Mike, thank you so much for your time today. You've been an amazing guest with incredible stories, and I really think that we will be raising more awareness just even as a result of you being on our show. So thank you so much for coming on.
I've really enjoyed my time here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. To any North Korean thinking of defecting, I couldn't encourage you or say that you should defect, simply because the risk is so great. You could be imprisoned, tortured, and possibly executed. But there are many refugees, North Koreans, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, that have decided to make that decision, and many that have made it safely to China, to other countries, to South Korea, to the United States, and they've decided to go after that dream. And with any dream, there's risk, and I feel like that's a very personal decision to chase after a dream. But if your dream is to be free, to live outside of North Korea safely, freely, to speak your voice and express yourself, then there are many that have made that journey, that have made it safely, and are living out their dream as we speak.